Hi, I'm Matthew Henning, and today we're teaching basic editing. Hey guys, welcome back. Thank you so much for joining us for our third quick class. Today we're going to be going over some basic editing techniques for you guys. We're going to edit the pictures that we took in the last two classes so you can see the progression from shoot through to edit right the way through to the finished product. Before we get started on editing individual shots, I wanted to talk quick about editing workflow. So at the moment, photographers do have a lot of free time. We're not shooting any functions right now with the lockdown. So I know a lot of us are going to be catching up with our edits, and it's really important that we try and make these as efficient as possible. So I'm going to show you the workflow that we use to try and maybe help you with yours. So let me bring this up here for you. Okay, the software I'm working in is Adobe Bridge. Bridge is essentially a cataloging and organizational software for photographs. You don't need to import any of your images into Bridge. Everything you have will already be here. So you can see here on the far left panel, this is our sources. So I've got some of my backup drives plugged in here, and I have a client job open just for you to see. So the far left panel is your source. Second from the left is your content. So let's get started. So I'm going to open up my first folder, and you can see here we've got quite a few pictures open. I think it's 1,200 odd to be precise. And from here we are going to go and pick the pictures that we want to edit. Now this is really important because you don't want to spend so much time editing every single shot only to cut it out and not deliver it later. You want to do this step first. So it just reduces that editing time. You're only editing, say, 300 instead of 1,200. So it's really, really simple. I would go through my images, and I'm just going to give a colored label. You can see I've done it here already in this batch because I've already edited these. I'm going to give a colored label to every single image I want to keep. So you can see there, this one's got a blue label underneath it. And very easy to do it. You can either right click and go label and then give it a color. Or if you want, the short key is Command 8 or Command 9, depending on the color you want to use. Or on PC, that would be Control 8 or Control 9. So you can see I've just added a green label to this image. Let me go and remove it quick. And what happens, as soon as I add a label, you're going to see here in this little filter panel down here, you can see how many images I've selected. So just by clicking on the blue labels, I now have access to only the blue label images. From here, I can then open those up into Photoshop and get started with the edit. So this just helps streamline the whole process, and you're doing everything together. So when I open up a wedding job, I'll go through and pick all of the images that I want to edit, and only then do I start editing. So we're doing things in batches. It's a really great way to streamline your process and get everything going as quick as possible. Right, so onto the basic editing now that I've showed you the workflow. Where's our images? Okie doke. So I've got the two images that we edited for thumbnails open up, and I've got their finished products here that I have done already. We'll show you a little bit later. And you can see I have already green labeled those. So let's open those up into Photoshop and see where we go from there. Okay, so I shoot in camera raw. It's always best to shoot your images in raw. You do retain a lot more tones and color. There's a lot more you can do with it in post. So this piece of software is bundled with Photoshop, and it's called Camera Raw. This is where we do all our tonal adjustments. So there's three elements to basic editing that you need to take into consideration. That's color, tone, and crop. And all of those elements we can do from Camera Raw before we even get into retouching and composites and all that sort of extra work that you can do in Photoshop. Right, so let's start first with color. Your first two sliders you're going to use are your white balance. You can see them up here, top right. We have temperature and we have tint. Now the best thing with editing software is to go by trial and error, swing the slider as far to the right and as far to the left as you can and just see what difference it makes, and then you kind of bring it back to where you want it to be. So you can see there I've warmed the image up quite a bit. Because we were shooting with colorful lights here, obviously it's a little bit different to a neutral toned image. It will change your colors a little bit. Oh, something I forgot. Quite important. It's you really have to remember, editing is not about fixing bad shots. It's about building on and fine-tuning something you've done well in the shoot already. And this is really important. You mustn't lean on Photoshop to fix your mistakes. You must try and get it right in the shoot, and then when you bring it into post, you're building on top of an already strong image. So just keep that in mind when you're shooting. Don't think, okay, well, I can just fix it in Photoshop, because it doesn't always work that way. And there's only so much you can do with Photoshop as well. Right, so we're starting with our colors. First is temperature. That's our warm and cool, so orange and blue. And then second we have tint. So you can see here, I can either lift the magentas or I can lean more towards the green. So again, just going to do it by eye. What do I like? And there it is. Now this is quite important with your editing as well. There is no right or wrong edit. There's stuff that either works or doesn't work, and you could get an infinite amount of results. Everyone's would be different and they could all work. It's all about your own personal style and the emotion or feeling you're trying to express with your image. And a lot of that comes through with the tone of your image and the color of your image. So a warmer toned image will feel warmer, and a cooler toned image will feel a little bit colder and more dramatic. Same with your brightness. A very bright, high-key image will feel very light and happy, whereas a darker image will feel a little bit darker and more dramatic. So take this into consideration when you're editing. What do you want your viewer to feel when they look at your photograph? And this will help guide you as to what direction you want to go and what you actually want to do in the edit. Okay, so we've done our first step with temperature and tint. That's up here. The next part of color I'm going to show you is all about editing individual colors. So being able to pull out a certain color and make adjustments to that color specifically. So for that, we're going to go into this tab here. It's called the HSL Adjustments tab. And we have three little sub tabs: hue, saturation, and luminance. So we're going to start with hue. Hue is basically changing the color slightly of a specific color. So let's go and have a look at what effect that has. So we've got a lot of purples and magentas here. So let's see. So you can see how I'm just either making that purple area a little bit more blue or a little bit more pink, and I can control it from there. So we're going to add a little bit more pink into that because we're going for something quite intense and colorful, and I really like it. Let's see the aquas. So that would probably affect this area here. Let's have a look at what that does. So we can make those a little bit more green, or again a little bit more blue. I like that sort of light blue color. That's quite interesting, and I think goes with the pink quite nicely. Again, personal taste, up to you what you want to do. Right, so that's the hue tab sorted. Let's go over to saturation. Now what saturation does is it's the intensity of that color. So you can pull intensity out of a specific color. Let's go and have a look at what it does to our purples quick. So you can see there, I can desaturate just the purples or even oversaturate them. So you've got a lot of control here. Just for balance sake, I'm going to bring these purples down a little bit. I felt that pink was like really strong and maybe a little bit too much so. And then I want to see if we can get a little bit more saturation into that aqua blue color that we have there. We go. So you can see it's just intensified the color in this area a little bit, which I really like. And then your last tab for color is luminance. So this is how bright or dark that color represents in the image. And again, it only affects the one color that you are working with. So let's work with the purples. And you can see there from one extreme to the other what sort of difference it makes. Now I want to bring attention to the face. So I'm going to lift the brightness on the purples, the luminance, sorry, just a little bit. So you can see from there to there, just to help draw the viewer's eye into the face a little bit more. You know, your eye is always attracted to the brightest part of an image first, and when you're doing portraits, you always want that to be the person's face. So that's the very first thing your viewer looks at. Now color wise, I'm happy with that overall. I think we can go into the tones now. So let's head back to our basic adjustments tab and we can get started with our tones. Now it's important to remember, as you change your tones and colors, it will have an effect on your overall image. So you might need to go back afterwards and fine tune everything just so that it all works together. So firstly, our first slider that we're going to be working with is exposure. Essentially, it's just the brightness or darkness of an image. And again, it's always good to see what sort of effect that has and then make a call from there. So I want to brighten my image up a little bit. So we're going to add a little bit of exposure. Personally, I try and shoot my exposure as close to what I want the finished product to be, and if not exactly where I want it to be, I will always shoot slightly darker. Cameras tend to retain more detail in the shadows, so if you're going to be off on your exposure, it's always better to be underexposed than over. A lot of these cameras, you don't see it on the back of the screen, but there's a ton of detail in your shadow areas. I did do a short video on the dynamic range of the Nikon Z7. Perhaps I can upload that to YouTube. You can see for yourself, but it really shows you how much detail is retained in the shadows, and that's really important. Right, so we're happy with our exposure there. I'm going to play a little bit with my contrast. Personally, I like a very contrasty image, so I always push it up just a tiny bit. But again, that's personal taste, completely up to you. Right, now these next four sliders, highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks, they control a very specific tonal area of your photograph. So your highlights it's specifically highlight control. It'll only control that one area. And that's a really great way to bring slightly bright or slightly dark images back into the range. And this is where you control the overall tonal balance of your photograph. You want something that's pleasing to the eye, and a very big part of that is how you balance the tones in your image. And this is really, really critical, and I would definitely suggest experimenting as you go and just see what sort of changes it makes. Right, so the first thing we're going to do, I'm finding this area maybe still a little bit too light for me, and that would fall under highlights or whites. So let's pull those back down a little bit, and you can see there, it's just pulling those highlights back in. Let's see, whites as well, just to bring it, make it feel a little bit more balanced. So I'm really happy with that. Now let's look at the shadows and the blacks. So let's see how far. Can push the shadows up quite a bit. That's quite nice. So that brings out a little bit of this background area. I don't know if you can see the same quality that I can. And then blacks we can bring back for a little bit more punchy image. And then the last two sliders I use are your vibrance and saturation. Now something important to remember with regards to vibrance and saturation. Sometimes we feel the need to bring out a lot more color in the shot, because no matter where you are, especially with travel, the image is never really the same as being there, and often the mistake is to push that saturation to bring more of the natural color out. But I would be very careful with this. You don't want to overdo the saturation. It tends to make an image look very fake. So if you are going to add saturation, I would definitely do it sparingly. Personally, I only ever use the vibrance slider, but again, up to you. You can see there the sort of extremes. I might add just a tiny bit of color there. Awesome stuff. Okay, so in terms of tones and colors, I'm really happy with that image. The next thing we're going to look at is the crop. So you've got a couple tools up here for cropping. The first is your straight crop tool. So that's just to trim a couple areas. And then your last one is your straighten tool, which is quite handy when you're shooting on the fly. It's very often that I find my images are slightly tilted, like just a couple degrees. And this straighten tool is a really great way of, you can use an existing point in your image. Let's say, for example, you got steps, you draw a line across it, and Photoshop will automatically straighten it based on what you've done. And then crop tool, very straightforward. If you hold on it, you have a variety of perspectives to choose from. And you're just going to drag. I'm going to trim a little bit off the top there. Again, this is personal preference. How do you like to crop your images? So just a little bit of trim makes the face a little bit bigger in the frame. I prefer something a little bit tighter and cleaner, but again, it's up to you. Some guideline I normally use for cropping is the rule of thirds, which is really great. For those that didn't see it last time, rule of thirds is basically just dividing your image into thirds horizontally and vertically and placing your subject on one of those third points. So it's a sort of go-to, how can I say, it's compositional technique that you can use. That's absolutely fantastic. It really, such a small difference will make a big difference to the image. Naturally, putting something in that intersection point, it tends to make an image a little bit more pleasing to the eye. Right, so overall, I'm happy. You can let me know what you think in the comments. I'd love to hear all your thoughts. And we're done with the overall image. Now we're going to talk about the next two tools that you can use in Photoshop. Okay, so all the adjustments I've shown you will make an adjustment to the image as a whole. So it's literally the entire image will get the same adjustment. Sometimes you don't want to do that. Sometimes there's only one very small specific area that needs to be adjusted. So in this instance, I personally feel like there's maybe a little bit too much pink on the face, like this area here, the near eye. It might be nice to neutralize that out a little bit, take a little bit of the pink out of that. So what we're going to use here is the adjustment brush. So basically what the adjustment brush does is it gives you all the same controls as before. You just get to pick where those changes are made. So firstly, I'm going to just paint over the area that I want to adjust. And you can see now the adjustments that I make will only affect that area specifically. So let's take a little bit of the pink out there first. Let's see if we can get a little bit out. I'm going to add a bit of warmth back in. And I want to reduce the color, so I'm just going to drop the saturation ever so slightly. A bit more warmth. Okay, and then you can always add to your brush selection just by painting over additional areas. You can see there now I can remove it from the nose and the forehead. So you've got a little bit more of a neutral tone. And I just feel like that brings that tonal balance back. The pink isn't so overpowering. Now again, we're going to fine tune a little bit. There we go. Happy with that. So first image done. I'm really happy with the outcome. From here, it would go into the retouching stage, which we're going to do a little bit later on. But before we do that, I just want to show you the second image that we're going to do. So this was the image we shot in class 2. And this was all about working with afternoon light. Now we really wanted to do a sunset lit shot on that day, but unfortunately it was an overcast day. So we had to create a sunset with a warm tone LED. If any of you watched the class, you might recognize the pic. So yeah, so let's get started with that. Oh, before I do that, there were a few other natural light shots. I just wanted to show you how we've used it in weddings before and some examples of previous work. We are currently working in Adobe Photoshop. So Camera Raw is part of Photoshop. When you open a raw image into Photoshop, it should automatically open up here. Once I've opened these images, just in case you did shoot in JPEG, there is a Camera Raw filter that you can access from inside Photoshop that we can show you as well. Okay, so let's go on to the next image. So we faked the sunset here, for those that did watch, if you remember. So this is not a real sunset. So I want to make some adjustments to this just to make it really, really feel like a sunset. So the first thing I noticed is we had this lovely warmth on Annie's face, which was really nice. I love the lighting on that. But I wanted to bring that warmth into other areas of the image. So the first thing I'm going to do is just give the whole image a general warm-up. Okay, loving the look of that. I might add a little bit of pink, because often with sunsets you get a little bit of a pink tone too. So you can see there now all this leaf area has warmed up really nicely. I'm going to just quickly go and do the rest of my tonal adjustments. So I wanted to see a bit more of the leaves. I brighten my exposure and my shadows a little bit just to bring them out. Now with that, I've noticed Annie's face is getting a little bit too bright, so we're going to bring back highlights. I'm going to bring back whites, and then I think it just needs a little bit more punch, so I'm going to add a tiny bit of contrast. Now overall, I'm really happy with the tone. I just feel like Annie's face is maybe a tiny bit too orange. It's a bit too warm. So we're going to go into our local adjustments again. Let's see here, adjustment brush. Let me just... One thing to note about the adjustment brush is it does keep the settings from the last time you used it. So if you're going onto another image, you definitely need to reset all of those settings and then start again. So all I really want to do is remove a bit of the warmth from Annie's face. So I'm going to start with just dropping the temperature slightly. And I'm going to paint that adjustment over her face there. Right, and then once it's painted, you can go back and change it again. Unless you click new, then you're creating a new adjustment. So we can have a look there and see just the extremes of what that'll do. Now I want to keep a bit of warmth, so I'm going to put it about there. Right, so I'm happy with that. We've brought some warmth into the rest of the image. We have retained the color temperature on Annie's face, so she's not looking too orange. I'm really happy with the skin tones. I'm happy with the overall tone of the image, and I think it's looking great.
Kyle and Donna say the cats seem to be regulars on the stream.
Yes, we try very hard to get pictures of them all the time, but they can be a little bit tough. But they love to be in the background and they love to talk to us, so you might hear them meowing every now and then. So yeah, I'm really happy with those two images. So from here, what we're going to do, once you're done with your raw adjustments, you're just going to select them all and you're going to say open images. Now what that does is that will then open it into your main Photoshop. It does take a little bit of time depending on how many images you have. Now the main Photoshop, this is where you're going to do all your skin retouching, your composite work, removing background elements, changing the background. This is really like the very detailed part of Photoshop. So before actually we go on to that, I just wanted to let you know we have been given the Nikon Z50. I don't know if you can see that. Let's see there. Get focus. There we go. We've got the Nikon Z50. This is an amazing camera. I had the opportunity to test it out a few months ago, but we'd love to test it for you live on stream. So while Annie's getting set up, she's going to be showing you the retouching. She's the guru. I'm not so good. I don't have the patience for retouching, unfortunately. But just while she's getting set up, I wanted to show you a little bit more of the Z50, and I'm looking forward to doing a stream on that where we show it to you in more detail.
Hey there guys, how are you enjoying the class so far? I hope you are having a great time, and if there's any questions that we haven't answered or any problems that you have with editing, just drop us a comment and Matt will answer them at the end of the class. I'm Annie and I'm going to be teaching you a few quick easy tips on very basic skin retouching on Photoshop. Right, so I'm just going to open up my screen for you for a second. Right, and you can see I'm going to be working on this shot that we took in the natural light. The first tool, we're just doing very basic tools today. The first tool that I'm going to be showing you is the spot healing brush. So you can see here it's this little plaster icon with the little dots around it, and that is your spot healing brush. So this brush basically will get rid of little bumps and creases and small inconsistencies in your shot. So I'm just basically clicking on the little bumps that I see, and it's removing them for me nicely and just giving a like smooth, soft skin texture. So spot healing brush is such a simple tool, but it's used in all sorts of editing. We use it with editing our wedding images and fashion. It's a great starting point for editing skin. Right, so I'm pretty happy with how that's looking for now. So I'm going to go on to my second tool, which is the clone stamp. So if you can see here in my toolbar, it's the little stamp. It looks like a cookie stamp. Right, and that's what I'm going to be using next. Just to give you guys an idea of how this tool works, I'm going to pop my opacity onto 100, and I'm just going to press Alt, hold Alt and click onto a sample. And basically how it works is it paints a sample onto a different area of the image. Right, so how we use that with skin retouching is we just pop the brush onto a really low opacity. I'm going to do it on 20, and I'm going to make my brush really, really soft. So you can see here now, if I just do a little example for you, with the brush really soft like that, you can see on the side of the screen where I've done an example, it's really, really soft and feathered, and that's what we want with the skin retouching. We don't want to be able to see brush strokes or that we've done any work on the image. A good rule that we always work to is that the best retouching is, and the best editing is always, you can't really see that the image has been worked with. It looks really natural and it looks like it was just shot that way. Right, so I'm going to get started with my clone stamp, and what I'm doing at the moment is I'm sampling from various areas that are near to where I'm working, and I'm just painting in small little circles. So you want to be quite light-handed with this tool. I find if you overdo it, your skin loses the texture and it doesn't look real anymore. So we're just going to go over these areas where there's a bit of texture that we want to smooth a bit. I also like to use the clone stamp to contour a face. So if you look here by my jawline here, you can see there's a bit of bumps and uneven surface, and I'd actually like to smooth those out a bit. So I'm going to sample from the lighter areas and just paint over those bumpy shadows there. Right, so that's smoothed that out nicely for me. I'm quite happy with that. Just going to go over this bit of texture here. This is actually a great example here that I'm going to show you now. You can see there's a small dark circle under this eye, and I don't really want that. So I'm going to sample from just below that dark circle. I want this area to be this color skin tone. So I've sampled from there, I've clicked, and I'm just going to paint over that area very gently. And you can see it's gradually becoming the same color as that lighter area, which is fantastic. I'm going to do the same to the other eye. A good thing to watch out for when you're using this tool or any brush tool when you're editing is you really want to make sure you don't go over the focal points of the image. So in this case, it would probably be the eyes. I'm just going to show you quick what will happen. If I click here on the cheek and I accidentally go over the eye, you can see there if I show you before and after, see how you've lost that clarity in the eye, and you really don't want that. You want it to be nice and sharp. The same goes for areas like the lips, the lip line, and especially with the edge of the face. So just to give you an example, if I go over the edge there, I'll show you before and after. You see how you lose that lovely crisp line. So we just want to be careful of that because our brush is so feathered. Sometimes even if we're painting within a line, we don't even realize that we're getting a bit of splash on the other side. Right, so I'm just going to carry on smoothing out this area here. I've just seen there's a few flyaways here, a few strands of hair that I don't quite like. I want to clean up the image a bit. So I've gone back to my spot healing brush And I'm just going to make my brush really small and go over that little strand. It's going to take it away for me nicely. So this we normally use if there's 1 or 2 strands going across the face. It's a great tool to get those strands out of the face. I'm going to go back to my clone stamp and just smooth over that area nicely. Right, I'm really happy with how that's looking. Another thing I quite like with this tool is sometimes if we got a bit of sort of overexposed highlights where there's shine on the face, if your model's sweating a little bit, you can sample from a more mid-tone area and just gently brush over those highlights where there's a bit of sweat or shine, and that can bring those areas down quite nicely. Right, so I'm pretty happy with that softening. It's looking good. Right, so we did have somebody ask on the WhatsApp group about frequency separation. Normally we would apply this action here, but it is quite a complicated process, so we're not going to cover it today. But just for fun, I'm just going to show you what it looks like, because we've got a little action set up. Our editor set this up for us. Thank you, Mika. Lovely, and I'm just going to go and up my opacity of it. And
what opacity are you using there?
I'm using 50.
50%.
Yeah. Lovely, and I'm just going to paint over these areas. So just for fun fact, frequency separation basically takes the skin and separates it into 2 layers. So you have the underneath layer, which is the sort of shape, and it smooths that out nicely and then adds the texture back into the face. And it just gives a really clean look, and it still feels like skin. It's still got the natural texture of skin. So it's a really great tool to use. Right, just a takeaway from, for all your editing, what I normally like to keep in mind is it's important for your whole image to look cohesive. So if there's something you need to work on in the face and the cheek, but the forehead is perfect, just do a gentle brush over that area anyway, even if it doesn't need it, just so that the whole image is looking polished and consistent. Same with the area, like the neck areas. If the skin on the arms is looking a bit rough, just give it a gentle brush over so that everything looks smooth and cohesive.
Somebody's asked if you could, if it's possible to zoom in to see where these tools are.
Yes. I don't know, can I zoom into the toolbar? I don't think I can. Okay, so this is a spot healing brush. I don't know if you can see my mouse is circling it. It's a little plaster with little dots around it. And the clone stamp is just below. I'm going to circle it for you. It looks like a little cookie stamp. Alright, so those are those 2 tools.
Somebody asked, do you guys generally use dodging and burning?
Actually, that was the tool I was just about to go onto. It's the last tool I'm going to go through. Let me show it to you now. Right, so this tool here, you can see, I'm going to circle it again for you. If you click and hold on here, you're going to bring up your dodge and burn tools. So these tools are pretty handy. The burn tool will paint in a darker exposure, and the dodge will do the opposite. It will paint a bright exposure. Right, so I'm going to use the dodge tool, and where we'd normally use this, I'm just going to flatten the layers. Just so you know, we will be using a few hotkeys as we're working. Hotkeys are keyboard shortcuts, and they're quite handy to use for efficient editing. So I'm going to Control E, and that's going to flatten my layers. So that's quite a nifty one, Control E. Right, so now I'm on my background layer, and I'm just going to add a bit of dodging onto the highlights of the image. Sometimes I find when you blur the skin slightly, when you retouch, you can lose those beautiful highlights that we got when we shot the image with the lovely light. So highlights just add that dynamic range back into the shot. Right, I'm just going to go over these little highlights by the lips here just to bring some attention to them, and a bit by the forehead, and over this paw detail here. Right, and then another area where we generally use a bit of dodging is in the eyes. So when we're working with eyes, you have to be very careful and very light-handed. I find if you overdo it, your shot can look a little bit creepy. So we want to keep it as natural looking as possible. A great way to start is by making your brush quite small and just dodging in this color area between sort of the pupil and the edge. If you have, you're shooting somebody with very light colored eyes like we've got here, you don't need to do it too much, but if somebody's got brown eyes, or if you've been shooting with a light that had quite a dramatic angle and it threw a lot of shadow into the eyes, it's a great thing to dodge those eyes a bit, just so you have some light in there. Right, so I've dodged in the color area, and now I'm just going to add a tiny bit of pop to the whites, just by going in a very small semicircle, just twice over that area to brighten there a bit. Something normally a no-no that I use when I'm brightening eyes, you can see there's a lovely natural shadow that falls just under the lid of the eye. And I find if you dodge over that, your eyes start looking a little bit flat and you've sort of lost that lovely shape that the eye has. So it's important not to lose that. The last thing I would normally do with dodging eyes, you can see we've got these lovely catch lights that Matt managed to get when he was lighting this situation. Sometimes if your light angle's a bit off, you've only got a catch light in one eye, or maybe your catch lights are quite dull, I would normally go over and just dodge over these little bright spots. So there's a few here, a few small ones. And you can see the little catch lights in the waterline. It's nice to just brighten those up a bit. It makes the eyes feel nice and glassy and bright. Right, so I'm pretty happy with how that's looking. It feels like we did a very light touch over that image. Let's go and have a look the difference that we made. So this is the raw image just after Matt did his raw adjustments, and this is what we've accomplished at the end.
Can you do a zoomed in version of that where the face fills the screen?
Yeah. Just another little hotkey for you. I find it's quite handy when I'm working close up with an image. If you hold in your space bar, you can see this tiny little hand comes up, and as you click, you can grab your canvas and move it around. It's quite handy when you're working very close. Right, so let's see, that fills your screen quite nicely. So I'm just going to do before. So this is out of camera, straight out of camera with the raw adjustments, and this is after our retouch. So it does give quite a nice result. It's nice and polished and it looks really professional. So yeah, so it's a great technique to use with your images to make them look really professional. So I'm going to give you back to Matt, but just before I go, I have something to show you. I see somebody asked on the comments for before and after of the full edit. So let me play that for you now.
Hey, so I hope you guys enjoyed that. Thank you so much for joining us. There were a few questions on the group and in the comments I just wanted to answer. As far as editing screen goes, you just want something with a high quality and IPS. Personally, I have a Dell 27-inch 4K. We do a little bit of video editing as well, so it's really great for that. There were a few other things I wanted to show you quick as well. I know some people asked for a zoomed in version of the buttons. So I'm going to try and do that here for you now. Give me a sec. Okay, so there we have our first few buttons. Let's see here. This was your spot healing brush here. Then we have got your clone stamp there. It looks like the little joystick. And let's see if we can move this further down a little bit. And then down here we have your dodge and burn tool. Now if you hover or hold on something, it'll give you a few options. So you can see by clicking on that, I can now see my dodge tool and my burn tool. So yeah, that was that. Was there any other questions? Oh yes, I believe Rais asked, do we not create another layer? Now it's definitely best to do another layer when you're working in Photoshop. We've worked in our background layer here just for example purposes to give you an idea of what we're doing. But if you're doing work that you're giving to a client, I would definitely advise creating a second layer of your image and working in that rather. So if you make any mistakes, it's very easy to remove them without being destructive on your images. So that's definitely something to take into consideration. Were there any other questions that anyone had from the group or that?
On the previous class, somebody asked how you would do black and white.
Okay, so black and white, I'm going to show you on this image here. Give me a second. Sorry, I just need to get my Photoshop back looking the way it's supposed to, so that you can see my whole image.
Kyle and Donna say, you guys are the best team ever.
Hey Kyle, hey Donna, hope you guys are well. Let's see, we got our full screen here. Okay. Okie dokie, there we go, so we got our full Photoshop back. Right, so there's a few different ways that you can do black and white. There is an option to do it in Camera Raw, where you just click on a little button that'll switch it to black and white. You can also reduce your saturation to 0. That's another really great way to do black and white, but I'm going to show you my absolute favorite, the one that I use most, just because I like the tones that it produces. So the first thing you're going to do is in your top bar, you're going to go into Image, and you're going to go down to Adjustments. Then from Adjustments, there's a selection called Gradient Map. We're going to select quickly Basics. Let's do the drop down, and it has a black and white option. So I really like this version of black and white. It's quite punchy, and it really represents the tones quite nicely without blowing out any highlights or making any shadows too dark. So I'll show you in between the two. There we go. There's our color and our black and white. I find black and white images always work best when there's quite a bit of contrast in the image. They need like quite a strong difference between your lights and your dark areas in order to work well.
Ahmed has asked, why do you use Photoshop over Lightroom? Is it just personal preference?
Lightroom is a very powerful tool. It's really great to edit quickly, especially if you're not doing too much in the way of skin retouching and composite work. Personally, I do a lot of removing of lights and gear from photographs. I really bring my lights in close when we're photographing couples. So often in my shot, you'll see one of our pro photo lights, which are amazing, but the problem is they're quite big. So they take up a bit of space in the shot, and Photoshop allows us to remove that really cleanly. We will do a more advanced lesson where we show you how we created our skin retouching action. And in there I'll show you how to remove things like light stands and people and stuff like that. So I personally prefer Photoshop for that reason. It's a little bit more accurate and you can do a bit more with it. If you're not doing retouching and you don't want to remove too many background things, Lightroom's perfect for everything that Camera Raw can do. There was one last thing I wanted to show you for those that haven't shot in RAW but want to be able to get those RAW adjustments. If you have your picture open, you can go to Filter, and there's an option called Camera Raw Filter, and that will essentially open up this RAW panel as it was for what the tonal work that we did before we started retouching. So even if you need to fine tune your shots, you can go in here, tweak a little bit more. Sometimes retouching changes the balance of your shot slightly. It needs to be slightly brighter, and then you can re-edit from there should you need to.
Amir has asked, when you do a wedding, do you retouch every bride photo?
Okay, so this, personally, we retouch every single picture with a couple in it. Even if we're delivering 1,000 images, we make sure their skin is retouched in every single photograph. I do charge for it though. So if you're not charging for it, you don't need to do it. But whatever you tell your couple you're going to do, you need to do. So if you say I'm going to retouch your face and remove your pimples and lipstick marks, then you need to go and do that. But it's completely up to you what you want to include in your packages. If you want to have that as an added extra for them to pay for, you're more than welcome to. Personally, I like all our images to be retouched. It really gives you like a fantastic, polished, professional look to your final image. And if all the images are looking that way, then your client's going to be happy.
Somebody's asked, how much does it cost to use Photoshop?
So Photoshop currently is subscription based. We have the full package, so that includes Premiere, it includes Muse, Illustrator, InDesign, all the additional software. I think that's about 900 odd rand a month. They do also have a photography only package, which is Lightroom and Photoshop, which is I'm sure would be plenty for most. And I think that's $9.99 a month. I think it's about 150, 160 rand. So it depends on the exchange rate. But considering what Photoshop used to charge for its software, I believe that the subscription base is very reasonable. Even as an amateur, I'd be more than happy to pay 150 rand to have access to such a powerful tool. And so long as you keep paying, you'll always have the latest and most updated version as well. Any other questions?
That's it.
We're all good. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We look forward to seeing some of the editing and retouching you do. Please do post on the group. We'd love to see the results you get. And if you have any further questions, you can put them onto the WhatsApp group too, and we can answer you there. Thank you all so much. It was an absolute pleasure again, and we will see you shortly with our next class. Take care. Good night.